Police have launched a murder inquiry after 3 men were found shot dead in Essex.
3 men assassinated with pump-action shotguns.
This was drugs-related.
Welcome back to Muscle. Last time, we saw Carlton consumed by the raw power and chaos of his dangerous lifestyle around the time of the Essex Boys murders. Now in this next episode, the stakes get even higher. How did Tony and Carlton meet Nigel Benn? Where did Michael Steele come into the picture? And Carlton's first impressions of Bernard O'Mahony. Chapter 2, Carnage. Anna's screams will haunt him till the day he dies. Long, agonised howls of despair as she learned the terrible truth about the savage murder of her lover and his best pal, Tony Tucker. In those few minutes on a bitterly cold December day in 1995, Carlton became embroiled in one of the most notorious gangland killings in criminal history. Initially, he became the #1 suspect. He was under constant police surveillance for weeks, and Carlton went on his own quest for revenge, intent on wiping out the bastards who'd taken Tony's life. The first he knew that something was wrong was a phone call about 10:30 in the morning from a mate saying, "Carlton, I think something's happened to Tony and the boys." Carlton said, "What do you mean? What sort of thing?" "Something bad," he said. He'd heard something on the grapevine but wasn't saying much in case it was wrong. Carlton switched on the radio to catch the news. It was there on the 11 a.m. bulletin. The bodies of 3 men have been found in a Range Rover on a farm at Rettendon in Essex. Carlton shuddered. He knew Tony, Pat and Craig used the Range Rover. He even remembered the number plate, F424NPE. Carlton knew they'd been planning a little bit of secret business in Essex. But surely they couldn't be dead. The Essex Boys were invincible, weren't they? Carlton rang Andy, who worked for Tony in one of his elf shops. "Have you heard anything, mate?" Carlton asked. "No, mate," he said. Carlton was getting really bad vibes by now. "Can you go round and see Tony's missus to see if she knows anything?" Carlton asked. "Sure, mate," he said. He phoned half an hour later. He was with Anna. She hadn't seen Tony since the previous night, but that wasn't unusual and she had no reason to worry. "Oh, Christ, mate, the police have arrived," he told him on a mobile from the door. "They're talking to Anna now." Then Carlton heard the awful screams in the background as Anna's world collapsed around her. Carlton slumped onto his bed, sobbing like a baby, confused, distraught, fearful. This, he knew, was just the start of a dreadful nightmare, and the police quickly made it clear that they thought this could be the onset of a vicious gangland war with more bloodshed to be expected. Carlton had been a close pal of Tony Tucker's for 5 years, so it was no surprise that the old Bill were on his doorstep within a matter of hours. They were both in the back streets of East London and vaguely knew each other as kids. They met up again at this shop in Ilford where he sold bodybuilding gear, sports equipment and health foods, and had a security outfit in the back offices supplying doormen for nightclubs. He was doing really well. He was shrewd in business and highly successful with his turnover from providing club doormen, earning in excess of £5,000 a week. There was instant mutual respect when they met up in the early 90s. They were both fit, both bodybuilders, and shared the same interests in life: birds, booze and parties. He was shrewd with people too. I mean, he didn't tolerate fools gladly and was quick to make judgment about people he'd only just met. Carlton thought sometimes he was often too harsh with people, but he wasn't often fucking wrong. "Be careful, Carl," he said. "Most people are only using you. Don't trust anyone." It was ironic on the night that he was killed, he'd gone down a lonely lane in the dead of night. He had clearly trusted someone and they'd blown him to kingdom come. That's what brought the cops to his doorstep. It didn't take him long to find out that they were best mates, and Tony had obviously been double-crossed by someone he believed to have been a good pal. They need to talk to you to eliminate you from their inquiries, which really means they think you might have done it. "Where were you last night?" Carlton was in deep shock. He was worried, he was angry, and he didn't want to tell him anything. Quite frankly, his thoughts were that the old Bill themselves had killed the boys. The tragic death of the policeman's daughter Leah Betts from Sea only a few months earlier had triggered rumours that this was a brutal revenge shot down a dark lane to try to make it look like some sort of drugs war. Carlton was horrified that they were now considering him as a suspect. Why the f*** would he murder his best mate, Carlton asked him. He didn't tell him how close him and Tony were. At that moment in time, he wasn't saying anything to anybody because he didn't trust anybody. If they dug around, they'd have found out the obvious, that him and Tony did a bit of security work together, they partied a lot, they were best of mates. There'd been a lot of mutual favours. You know, Tony would give him money, invoices for fucking security jobs to keep the taxman happy, and Carlton helped him out of a club who's minded in Wandsworth and needed to sort some bother out for a local team of villains. Carlton took some of his boys up there and dealt with it. They stood beside Tony like mafia hoodlums. The locals had thought Carlton had taken over the door, but he told them, no, I'm just a friend. If you take on Tony, you take on them as well. They're both doing well out of the muscle business. Carlton got his own company set up, RenaQuest, doing club doors, concerts, sports events, that sort of thing, and made enough money to live well. Tony rented him an office next to his premises in Ilford, and they sort of worked side by side for a few years. Carlton was doing okay, but what Carlton made, Carlton spent. If he made 10, 20 or 30 grand, Carlton spunked it all away. But Tony had the style and the business brain. He knew how to turn over real money and make it work for him. He knew how to run a company for a year, then liquidate it, swap the directors about so no one knew where the cash was going, least of all, the tax man. He was really on the ball, fit, sharp and going places. A real professional. He was the one with a big house, the smart accountant, the flash cars and serious money in the bank. They used to joke that he was like a mafia godfather character and Carlton would call him Tony Mancino for a laugh, and he absolutely fucking loved it. Carlton was in his office one day when Nigel Benn phoned and asked him to do the security for his next fight. He'd already met Nigel's brother Danny when they were training in the same gym in Forest Gate when they were teenagers. Later on, when Nigel had just come out of the army and was getting ready for his first pro fight, Danny introduced him at the room at the top in Ilford, so they had met briefly. They chatted a few times since, while Carlton was doing the door at clubs like Stairs and Echoes. So they were on chatting terms, and now Nigel was really making the big time as a fighter with well-titled ambitions. He said a couple of times that if he needed a bit of work to give him a ring. But Carlton was never somebody who wanted to jump on a bandwagon and who never took him up on it. Tony didn't know that Carlton knew Nigel, and Nigel didn't know Carlton knew Tony. And Nigel didn't know anything about their criminal activities. He bought his vitamins, iron tablets, and other similar legal supplements off him when he was in training. Tony was more than happy to do the security for the next fight. It was the needle match return fight against Chris Eubank in 1993, the one that the entire British public were waiting for. Tony said, "Oh, I've got his mate Carlton here with him." And Nigel said, "I know Carlton. Bring him along for the fight." And that was the start of a three-way friendship that lasted through Nigel's career right up until Tony's murder. Tony respected Nigel as a boxer, but also liked him as a person. Once Nigel was having some minor trouble with his wife Sharon, and Tony was having woman trouble as well. And Nigel went to Tony's house and they sat and had a good moan up and a few tears. They just really gelled together. Then there was him, totally different again, but they all really bonded and become great mates. They were good times. They'd do the fight security together. He'd go with Nigel when he took the pre-fight blood tests or when he went to the toilet or changing rooms, and they'd always walked him into the ring. There was a young handicapped boy called Tim whom Nigel had befriended. In a fight, the first thing Nigel would do was see him and give him a kiss, and he always liked them to help Tim get backstage. He's a great human being, Nigel. He loved that kid, and the boy loved him. On the night of the Gerald McLennan fight, the London Arena in 1995, Tim was there as usual, and Nigel's second wife, Caroline, but there was trouble brewing early. Carlton needed to make sure everyone was going to be safe. They walked Nigel to his corner when the fight started. Carlton wanted to keep Caroline and Tim company because you can't see much from behind the corner. There was this big black security guard barring his way. Then Nigel hit the deck in round one and looked in trouble. Caroline jumped up, worried, and went forward. Naturally enough, this black geezer started pushing her back. Carlton said, "Hey, mate, don't do that. It's his fucking missus." She sat down and he held his hand. It was a vicious war going on in that ring. With every punch, Carlton could feel her squeezing him, taking the pain for Nigel. The black security guy stood right in front of Tim. Then Nigel turned the fight around and knocked McLennan out with some brilliant punches. They were all cheering and yelling and got up at the ringside cuddling Nigel. There were 13,000 people in there, all going mad. Right in the middle of it, the black bloke tells him, "You got to get off the ringside." Carlton said, don't you put your fucking hands on him. Tempers are flaring, and Nigel could see what was happening. Even with all the pandemonium going on, he came across and told the bloke, hey, lay off, his security. The bloke wouldn't take no for an answer, and he was trying to push him off the ring. He said something. Carlton can't remember exactly what it is, so bang, Carlton headbutted him and splattered his nose. Tony was also on the outside of the ring, holding onto the ropes, and Carlton shouted, oh, I've nutted him. The bloke tried to have another go and push him off. There were TV cameramen trying to film it for millions of Sky viewers to see, so he ducked out the way because they didn't want any bad publicity. Then the teamwork snapped into action. As the bloke reeled back trying to keep a foothold, Tony hit him crack, and he took off right up in the air, and where's he landed? Right on a fucking judge's table. This huge fucking lump has splattered right down in front of them, and they're all in their bow ties looking up to see what the was happening. They were busy now trying to do a damage limitation job. Carlton was holding a bloody great gash on his forehead. Frank Bruno had seen what was happening, and he came over to see if he could help. It was absolutely fucking mayhem. Carlton was bleeding. The black guy was bleeding from a busted nose, and lying on the judge's table, McClellan was still unconscious in the ring, so they needed to get Nigel out to safety. Then through all this commotion, Nigel's cuts man, Denny Mancini, clocked what was happening and came across to give him first aid treatment and stop the bleeding. The atmosphere was evil and getting worse. Then as Nigel was doing a TV interview, the black geezer was there again, staggering up in front of him, his face all busted up, and he's standing there, arms folded, threatening him, challenging him. By now, Carlton was really pissed off, so he said, I'll tell you what, mate, I'll let you do me from behind, and turned his back. The tension was unbelievable. Carlton could hear someone in the crowd shouting, Carl, Carl. There was a lot of geezers there who had known him, so Carlton wasn't too surprised. Then someone or something was tapping the back of his hands. Carlton looked down, and someone was pushing a knife his way. It had been passed down through the crowd, past the security boys, by somebody who obviously thought he was in serious trouble. Carlton looked at the blade, pushed it away, and said, no, I don't need that. He vanished back into the crowd, and Carlton thought, thank fuck for that. I didn't want to be seen on prime TV cutting a bloke up. That's a sure recipe for a five stretch. Things were calming down a bit, and McClellan was taken off to hospital, and Nigel was walking from the ring. He was a proud man and wanted to do it on his own, head held high. Every bit of him was hurting. He whispered to him, Carl, don't let go of me. He was like jelly. His legs were buckling under him. They walked him out through the crowd, and he'd gone. Carlton thought he was dying. Him and Tony carried him to the ambulance, and he flinched in agony every time they touched him. His job was done, and Nigel was now on his way to the doctors. By now, everybody was looking for him and Tony over the fight they'd had with this black guy. They rushed upstairs to Nigel's changing room, and Denny Mancini did a full cuts job on his injuries, cleaned him up, put some plasters on, and slipped out through a side door. There's f***ing uproar going on over you two, he said. Get out before they find you. They didn't need a second invitation. They were in their motor and on their way. All those memories of Tony and their wild times came flooding back as Carlton tried to come to terms with the fact that his best mate was dead. His best mate, his soulmate, blasted to death in cold blood. Never given a chance. Shot down like a rabid dog. Carlton couldn't believe it. He cried for a week, he drank for a week, and he got angry for a week. And Carlton was ready to go looking for some answers. He had no idea Tony and the boys had been in such danger. Yes, they lived a risky life, took chances, pulled a few scams, but it was all a game to him. It was like being on the outside of a gangster movie, looking in. Carlton was hearing hardened coppers telling him he fitted the profile of the sort of bloke that could do this terrible thing. He was, they said, regarded as a hardened gangster with big-time crime connections. Was this really him? What sort of world had Carlton got himself into? It was obvious that the police hadn't got a clue who was behind the triple murder. Neither had Carlton, nor had any of the mates that Carlton spoke to. He was getting sick of people asking him. He felt they were pointing the finger. You were his best mate. You must know. Carlton racked his brains, day after day, trying to remember people they'd met, places they'd been, deals they'd done, in the hope of a clue. He knew that if he found the killers first, he would have no qualms about exacting his own retribution. But nothing came to him. Somewhere in a distant memory, Carlton remembered meeting a bloke known as Mickey the Pilot. Blinding geezer, he remembered Tony saying. but he's paranoid as and his house has got more security cameras than Fort Knox. It didn't seem important. Not then, not yet. After the Rettendon murders, Carlton was doing a lot of thinking, wondering which people, which events might be significant, and he remembered how Tony had changed so much in the months before his death, how he had become a contradiction of everything he stood for. Health, fitness, reliability, all out the window. And he was on the slippery slope of serious drug abuse. One event that kept coming to mind was the night at the Ministry of Sound, which was then his top door job when a bloke called Bernie O'Mahony got stabbed. Through one of his regular doormen, Dave Dunn, he said he wanted to meet him. It was a meeting more dramatic than most. He turned up, bleeding from a knife wound in his stomach. He was lying on the toilet floor, writhing in agony. Carlton suspected right away who might have done it. A mixed race geezer he'd banned once, but he'd come back screaming up his name as a mate, and he'd been given a second chance. He was a right nasty fucker, and Carlton soon found him with a blood-stained knife still on him, so Carlton was sure he'd done it. He denied it. Carlton shouted at him, "Don't fucking lie to me. You've been barred once, they let you back, now you're taking a fucking piss. I'm responsible for the security here, and you show me total fucking disrespect." With that, he stabbed one of his doormen, and he pulled out a CS gas canister, so Carlton grabbed hold of him, hit him, and threw him into a small anteroom, not much bigger than a cage near the club entrance. Carlton grabbed an iron bar covered in a bit of rubber and battered his head so badly he needed 56 stitches. Carlton was like a fucking raving lunatic. It was at a time when he was doing steroids big time, doing all sorts of drugs, and he had completely lost the plot. It took 10 blokes to drag him off him, otherwise he would have most certainly battered him to death. Carlton was out of control, like a wild animal. In that world, respect is all important, and he had shown total disrespect. After the battering with a kosh, Carlton grabbed a chair and started belting him over the head with that. The other doorman had to grab him by the ankles and drag him through the club to get him away from him. They took him out the back exit, put him in a car, and a pal called Mark drove him off into the night and dumped him near where he lived. Carlton heard him saying to the geezer, "Where'd you live? Where'd you live?" The injured bloke could hardly talk, but managed to whisper Kilburn through blood-spattered teeth, and Mark shoved him in a boot and took him off. It was a big favour because the police were outside the front of the club, and if they'd known what had gone on, he'd have been on the 10 stretch for attempted murder. Carlton saw that Bernie was okay, and he calmed down and got back to business as normal. The Ministry of Sound was the top London night spot back then, and they got a fair bit of aggravation every now and again, but he never lost it like that before, and Carlton hoped he never would again. It actually scared him shitless, realising what he was capable of. He saw Bernie several times after that terrifying introduction. He kept turning up at places they were doing a door. He always had a camera, always wanted his photo taken with the faces on the club scene. Carlton wasn't interested. I mean, you take your photo when you're on holiday in Spain, yes, but don't stick a camera in your face when you're working on a fucking door. He turned up again when Nigel went to open the Academy gym in Southend. It was owned by a good friend of his. Nigel agreed to do the grand opening as a favour. And there was Bernie again, camera at the ready. Then Carlton remembered the night in July 1994 when Pat Tate came out of prison. They'd organised this big homecoming party on the Sunday evening at the Epping Forest Country Club. A big team turned out. There must have been 50 of them out in the jungle. They were all tasty types from all over Essex. Any sensible, normal person wouldn't have come anywhere near them. There was serious muscle there out to play. They were all having a good time, getting drunk, having a party. And there was Bernie again wanting pictures taken with Pat and Tony and him. Carlton wouldn't let him. It didn't ring right to him. I mean, what was his game? What was he up to? Next time Carlton saw him was at Raquel's nightclub in Basildon, which had become notorious over the Leah Beck's ecstasy tragedy. The pills that killed her came from the club, and it became the focal point of the police hunt for the pushers behind the racket. Bernie had been doing the door there, his own little bit of the security market, and they chatted a bit, and he said he needed some invoices to keep the taxman happy. He tried to tap Tony out for some dodgy bills and receipts. Tony came to him afterwards and said, "I don't trust him, Carl." Then Bernie got them some visiting orders to go and see Reggie Cray in prison. He was a regular visitor to Reg and various other notorious criminals, and got hold of 2 VOs, brandishing them like royal decrees. But Carlton didn't want to be like everyone else saying, "Oh yes, Carlton's been to see Reggie Cray." Carlton had the greatest respect for him and Ronnie. They were icons to him, the originals. Carlton was brought up with the Cray folklore in the East End, but he didn't want to be seen to be jumping on that bandwagon. He said to Tony, they'd give him respect, but they'd do it from a distance. And they never went, even though Bernie was pushing it. All these incidents were swirling around in his head as Carlton tried to fit the jigsaw pieces together. He didn't know what was important and what wasn't, but Carlton knew that somewhere there must be clues to his assassination of his pals. And he knew that he was in too deep for his own good. His name was hot in the gangland scene. He was into a lot of stuff inside the clubs and out. People were getting stabbed. People were getting killed on the doors. His name was being brought up too much for comfort. Tony's death was a massive wake-up call. His Carlton should have known where everything was leading, but he was blind to the stupidity of it all. Now he's got 3 mates in the mortuary. Carlton had suspected in the few weeks before the murders that Tony and Pat were definitely up to something because they'd become so secretive. 2 weeks before the shootings, it was Tony's 40th birthday and they'd all gone up to Hollywood's nightclub in Romford for a piss-up. Carlton had a gut feeling that night, a bad feeling that something wasn't right. Pat seemed to be sort of splitting up the friendship, the special bond between him and Tony. Right from the moment he came out, there was a spontaneous combustion between the two of them. A dangerous reaction. You sort of felt like it could explode at any minute. The trust between him and Tony was evaporating. They made a pact one night that they would look after one another, and if either of them went off for a bit of business on their own, they'd let the other one know. If Carlton got into a dodgy situation, he knew Tony would cover his arse, and vice versa. If Carlton disappeared or he disappeared, they'd know where to start looking. But that was all changing. Carlton asked him what was going on. He said, I'm onto something very, very big. But don't worry, mate, I'll look after you. Carlton knew that was true. The previous Christmas, he'd done a bit of business for Tony and taken him £2,800 in notes to his home. He'd actually hit a bit of a rough spot because Carlton was always so silly with his spending, treating everybody, and he knew it. Tony put the $2,800 on the table and he said, you're skin, aren't you? Carlton said, no, mate, I'm okay. But he knew. He said, here, take the £2,800. You and the kids have a good Christmas on me. Now, what sort of friend does that? Carlton loved him for it. He knew Carlton was struggling and Carlton couldn't hide it from him. There wasn't anything they could hide from each other. Or so Carlton thought. It was only after the murders that the dangerous secrets that he'd harboured finally emerged. He told Anna Whitehead, his girlfriend at the time, that he was onto the big job. A drugs deal worth over $1 million. A light plane was supposed to be flying a consignment of puff over from Belgium and landing in the field near Rettendon. Anna told him, he kept saying, Carlton can't wait for this to go off. I'm going to give Carlton 20 or 30 grand out of it. She said he seemed more excited about giving him the money than making a nice few quid for himself. It all turned out to be a hoax, but it rang bells with him. By then, Carlton met the mysterious Mick the pilot, Mickey Steele, at a party at a mate's snooker hall in Dagenham. He was with his missus and didn't have a lot to say to Tony or to him. But later on, Tony said he'd got this big drugs deal on the ball and did Carlton want to put some money into it and get a share of the profits. Carlton said he didn't have the dough and wasn't interested anyway. It turned out that this time it was a genuine deal, but the puff they bought turned out to be jank gear, a pile of rubbish. It went back to the dealers and they got their money back. By now, almost on a daily basis, Carlton could see Tony and Pat were on a high-octane fuel, getting wild, doing the most ridiculous things. They were doing dangerous stuff like racing their Porsches up and down the A127 Southend, arterial road, 140 miles an hour after a night spent fucking mainlining pure cocaine. They were also jacking up Min, Newbane and shit like that. Tony wasn't really a womanizer, but he was shagging other birds all the time, partying, drug taking and so on. Carlton remembered one weekend he was trying to contact him, but couldn't get hold of him. He was off the phone. It was important, so Carlton went to his house in Chafford 100 and knocked on the door. He thought something had happened to him. The door opened and Craig Rolfe was there with Tony. Craig was out of it. Tony was sitting on the edge of a chair laughing, hallucinating on something. Carlton said, what the f*** is going on, Tony? He muttered, oh, nothing, mate. Carlton could see by his eyes he was on something heavy. He was pulling down his shirt sleeve to hide something. Carlton grabbed it and pulled it up to see his arm. What the f*** are you doing, Tony? Carlton thought he was too ashamed to speak. He was on the precipice and hadn't a clue just how close disaster was. The first puff deal had left a nasty taste in the mouth, and Tony, Pat and Craig had got the raging up with Mickey Steele. To make matters worse, from what Carlton heard, Mickey was having a relationship with Pat's Mrs. Sarah. Pat and Mickey had met in prison, but had known each other a lot longer than Tony or Craig, so it was well out of order for Mickey to be fucking around with Pat's wife, even though Pat was always out on the town with other women. Pat was awesome. He was a big old boy with a big reputation, and he looked after a few people in prison and was well respected. He knew Reggie Craig very well from Whitemore and had minded a gay boyfriend for him. Yes, Reg was as queer as Ron, but Pat was a character and Carlton liked him. Mickey got to hear that Pat knew about him and Sarah's affair and was gunning for him. So according to what Carlton heard after the murders, Mickey and his pals decided to do Pat and the others before they did them. Mickey was very clever, very manipulative. He told Pat and Tony there was a big drug deal going down and they would wait for a plane load of gear to arrive. When it landed, they'd rob the people, take the drugs, grab the money and pull off a right old coup. The night they died, Carlton was told his three mates had gone down a country lane on a dummy run to get the lie of the land. It was all a scam. Their trust, or perhaps it was their greed, was rewarded with that terrible massacre that shook the Essex gangland scene to the core. Carlton wasn't invited in on this deal, phony or otherwise, thank God, because they knew he hadn't got cash to invest. But that night at the party when Carlton had that bad feeling and suspected something heavy was about to go off, he pulled Big Pat to one side and told him, look, I love Tony like a brother. If anything happens to him, I'll hold you responsible. Look after him and don't let me down. Carlton saw him on a Friday before the murders when they had a drink at the Berwick Manor near Upminster. Their secretive attitude did nothing to lessen his fears for Tony's safety. They were whispering, furtive, and not their usual selves all night. The night of the massacre, Tony, Pat and Craig, 3 grown men, 3 dangerous men, all professional criminals, went out without a weapon between them. Their mobile phones were all switched off. They were driven to Snow on Workhouse Lane in Rettendon, where Mickey Steele's partner Jack Romes was already hiding with a gun. Steele was in the back seat and got out, supposedly, to have a piss. Once he was out, Romes passed him a pump-action shotgun. He leaned in, opened fire. Rolf died first, his skull blown away. His hand still gripping the steering wheel, his foot still on the brake. In a split second, Tony sitting beside Rolf also got it in the back of the head. Then Pat was blasted in the chest, head and belly by both gunmen as he begged for his life. When anyone you know dies suddenly or violently, it sends a shockwave of nausea through your body and makes you feel physically sick. As the details of the triple murder emerged, as yet with the killers unknown, Carlton was racked with a mixture of dread, panic and anger that led to him shaking with rage. The next morning, the police were around his house in Brentwood saying that Carlton could be a suspect. He had a team of boys round him from his own firm looking after him, and Carlton was crying like a baby. No way, he said. Not Tony. Carlton told the cops, let's get one thing clear. If you badmouth my pal, if you slag him off, you can fuck off out of here right now. One copper said they only want to eliminate you from their inquiries, Carlton. Carlton fumed. Eliminate him? He was the best fucking mate I ever had. He said, well, right now, you are the top of their suspects list.